Through the magic of video, I've been able to cut and paste the mail function in here for you guys to see. So, as you can see, again, it's much like string word count in that you have the name of the function, in this case it's mail, and you got the following, you got our bracket pair that gives you a spot to actually insert your arguments. Now, with mail function, in that it's a more complex function, it requires a few more arguments. As you can see, we actually have 3 arguments for the mail function. It needs these to operate. Now, what you should take away from is that functions that have multiple arguments, like mail, each argument is separated by a comma here. So you got argument number 1, argument number 2, and argument number 3. Of course, the last argument doesn't need a comma. If you actually put a comma there, it's going to give you an error. So we've learned a few things in our introduction to functions. We've learned the structure of a function, its name, followed by the bracket pair, and you got to end it off with a semicolon. And we've learned that functions can return a value. So in the case of word count, its value is the number of words it's counted in your in the argument that you provided, right, in the sentence that you provided. Sometimes functions will just return a true or false value, true or false. And whether it returns a true or false value depends on whether or not the function was successful in doing what it's supposed to do. And this can be very useful in your PHP scripts. Now we're going to demonstrate how this can be useful now. So with the mail function, when it successfully sends a mail, it will return true. And if it doesn't successfully send a mail, it will return false. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch how we can use that inside of an if statement, inside of a conditional statement. Again, this is something we've looked at in a previous video. And we can see how we can make decisions based on whether or not the mail function has done its job. So what I've done here is basically created a variable, did underscore send, and I created this variable to capture the result that the mail function sends back to us once it's tried to complete its task. And in this case, to send an email. And what I've done afterwards, of course, is just a simple echo to show us what the variable did send, what it captured from the mail function. So let's launch the browser and see what happens. So we get the value of 1. 1, of course, is equal to true. Sometimes in PHP, when a function is going to return true or false, whether or not true, yes, I was able to do what I'm supposed to do, or false, I wasn't, sometimes it will return a true and false, as in the words true or false, and sometimes it will return 1 or 0, 1 being true, 0 being false. It really depends on the function, and you'll get to know this on a function per function basis. That's one of the little inconsistencies in PHP, and it's kind of a wet and wild language PHP is, and that's because it was developed over the years on I like to call it on a nerd to use basis. So there's inconsistencies in the language in PHP itself, and that's one of the reasons why people, nerds anyway, will complain about PHP from time to time. But to me, it's not such a big deal. So what I've done here in this step is to actually use the did send variable inside a if statement. And if this, of course, is true, if it results in 1, the if statement the PHP will print out this text here, mail sent. So let's just demo it real quickly. Of course, mail sent. So we know that the mail has been sent and the function has been successful. What you would need to take away from this is that you see how I'm able to use functions and their return values for instance, in 2 ways. I could use them to populate variables, or I could also use them within the context of conditional statements to do stuff to make decisions. Sometimes variables will return, sometimes functions will return a lot more advanced information. For instance, there are functions that might change all your text from lowercase into all caps, and then you could use the result, the return, in your pages. You can echo it out. You can do all kinds of different things. You can even use text from one function and insert it into another. So for instance, right here, string word count basically returns the number 11. So I could take, well, it was number 5 since there's 5 words in this particular sentence. I can do that and stick it in here in the mail function. So this last argument in the mail function, remember we have 3 arguments, argument 1, 2, and 3, separated by commas. This last argument I know, because I know the mail function, actually writes whatever's in here to the body of the email. The body being the main part of the email that people see. So this is the body of the email. This is the title, or the subject of the email rather, and this is to whom you'll send the email to. So in here, I'm actually grabbing the result from one function and sticking it in another. I could even do it directly like so. And that also works as well. So it really depends on, certain functions can work well with each other depending on the arguments that one function needs versus what another function spits out to you. Now, PHP is very, 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 very flexible in that it does its best to try to sort of wrangle, if you will, or finagle functions to work with each other and to work with whatever scripts you're writing. So this could be a good thing in some ways because things work more easily, but in the other ways it could lead to kind of strange, hard to find bugs in your code. I'm not going to get into this now because it's a little bit more advanced, but it's something that just to keep in the back of your mind that you may run into things later on, and perhaps we'll cover some examples in another video. Anyway, so let's take away, I think we've covered the basics here. Let's take away from this that functions can be used to feed other functions. Functions can return values, for instance, results like word counts, or it could just return true or false in the case of functions like mail, where you just want to know whether or not it worked or not. For instance, like in this scenario, perhaps your script, you don't want your script to move forward unless you know for sure that the email was sent out to the user. That's just one scenario, for instance. So I'm sure you can start coming up with other ones. For instance, there's a very important function in PHP, one that allows you, to connect to the MySQL database, something we'll cover soon enough. And it's very important that you get messages back from the functions, whether or not you've actually connected to the database. If you haven't, why? See, that's another thing. Sometimes functions are written in such a way so that if they don't work for some reason, the return value will be something intelligent, something intelligible that you can use to debug, to figure out why something didn't work. Perhaps with the MySQL function, you didn't give it a proper username and password, something, and then the function will return a result saying improper username and password. So just something to keep in mind.